Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hello, Bartek. How are you doing?
Oh, yeah, very, very funny. Very funny. For the people that haven't listened to the show before, I'm Ryan, and the guy other there talking is Bartek.
Oh, of course. I should have looked at our Google Calendar to really double check all of the information. It's really hard
Yeah, it is.
to make a podcast. It requires wrangling up guests,
Mm.
doing a Google Calendar. That's it. There's no other technical challenges.
You know, it's hard, but I gotta say I love the pod.
Yes, exactly. I love the pod. It's about, chilling out with powerful and important friends. Bartek, in all sincerity, jokes aside,
I know, I was
silliness aside,
gaslighting everyone. I'm actually Bartek.
your parents are actually upper middle class, so there you go.
Drop the subject, just move on.
Drop the subject. That's worse than a slur in certain circles, saying your parents are upper middle class. But we are Spit and Polish, and we are here to present to you our podcast where we talk about movies, and this time round, it's a movie that was recommended by the listening people, because each week we cover a film that has come recommended by a certain someone. We have a cycle. It starts off with Bartek, then the week after that, it is myself, and then the week after that, it is you, the listening people.
Today.
And it is from someone in particular, Bartek, who recommended the film, and what one did they give us?
Yes, this time the listening person is a person. It is my friend Amanda, and she has recommended us the 2022, I believe, film Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
That is correct. Amanda is a friend of yours. I've never met Amanda.
That's true.
Never met any of Bartek's female friends. Never have.
None of my gal pals.
None of Bartek's gal pals. All of his guy pals. Why hasn't Amanda been on the pod?
It's a very good question.
Good question.
This is the second film she's recommended us. The first one was Children of Men.
Children of Men, a very different film to Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Bodies, Bodies, Bodies is a fun one to say because it's the same word multiple times.
Bodies X3.
And it is a film that is a satirical, comedic horror, social commentary subject. It is very much in the vein of a lot of modern comedy films recently, in which it's the eat the rich type things, where we've had a lot of these, and they often are paired with horror films. I was thinking of things like The Menu, for instance, was another recent example of this, and there's so many others. There's even ones that, if you watch this on something like Netflix, Bodies, 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 it will recommend you 14 other movies that came out within the last 5 years that are exactly in the spirit of this, because it is very much a thriving style, but it's not a new one either. I will say that it reminded me less genre focused, but it did remind me of Coherence, a film that we've covered on the podcast, about a bunch of rich people stuck in a fancy pants house in the middle of the night as things outside are going crazy. Things inside are going crazy too, as people begin to slowly turn on one another, lose their minds, become paranoid, and people start dying one by one by one.
Yeah, the big difference being that this one deals with younger people, like in their early 20s.
And there is no supernatural sci-fi. This is just pure paranoia horror.
Yeah,
this is
a lot of...
Is it a slasher film?
That's
is it a murder mystery? Or is it just people losing their minds?
Yeah, it plays with the conventions of those types of horror films. Like, I was seeing, like, horror, comedy, slasher film being the labels given to this one.
And it's very much about the young generation of people on their phones, social media types, rich, young elites who are oblivious to real problems, but are they actually?
A lot of the trivia is talking about how this is, like, commentary on, like, Gen Z.
And we'll start talking about it in greater detail. So if you do not want to be spoiled out there, listening people, about this film, we recommend that you give it a proper watch for yourself, or you can listen on through and hear all of the gory twists and turns and details about this. Now, you and I both share the same history, if I'm not mistaken, of not having seen this before.
That's correct.
I had heard of this. I remember when it came out. I think I've seen the poster before, but I didn't know exactly what it was about. I didn't know who was in it. I didn't know the genre, but I had a suspicion about it. It just, even when you look at the poster, I didn't even note until like right before we recorded on the poster they're holding weapons. Oh, okay. Like it's very much tipping its hand, but I saw the image of it, and I had a feeling of what it would be, but that is not a guarantee. But my feeling was correct. It's going to be a bunch of young, rich yuppies in a mansion, and is there a killer amongst them? I didn't know what the name was in reference to. I just thought, oh, it's like a play on the fact that there's going to be many bodies in this film by the end of it, which is true, but I didn't know fully the extent of what we were going to be getting in store for. I don't know the reception of this movie, if it's positive or negative. I just know that when it came out, people were talking about it. But with the horror genre, which this does fall under, I'm not the best judge of being able to know whether or not people talking about it actually refers to it being a good film or not, because horror fans or people who just like to be spooked can be very forgiving about
Yeah,
certain
that's
things.
what I've heard. A
And
lot of like horror review sites, like if it's gory, they love it.
oh, of course. But tell me a bit about your experience with Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. Have you even heard of this beforehand?
I feel like I might have heard the name in passing, but it's not one that I would have remembered much about. When Amanda recommended this film, I was asking a bunch of my friends, like, hey, do you guys have any recommendations for, interesting films that we could do on the podcast? And she recommended 4 films, and she said that they were like some of her favorite horror or thriller type films. So I walked in thinking like, okay, this is a more positive example. But yeah, I didn't really know the style of it. I didn't really know what to expect. I think I saw, the genre markings of like what I mentioned before, like the horror comedy slasher thing, and the title. It felt like a very on the nose type title, like, oh, a slasher film called Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. It's probably referring to the fact that people are going to die. So I was thinking that, yeah, this would be a bit more of a, satirical type film.
And it sure is. This is such a fascinating piece of media because it is in a time in which there are so many films like it, and there's still so many coming out right now like this. I was thinking of Ready or Not is another example. There was one earlier this year. I can't remember its name, Abigail, something or other. It's about like a little girl who's a vampire, and Dan Stevens is in it. And
Oh, your favorite.
my favorite little guy. And there's
I
just
was thinking of the guest a little bit in this film.
yeah, and there's just a lot of movies that fill a very similar void in the market, but they all have their way of going about it. And I just find it interesting because I don't know, I have not seen, other than one cast member in this, I have not seen any of these actors in other projects, but I am aware of them. I'm aware of who Pete Davidson is because of
Yeah.
pop culture, but I don't think I've ever seen him act in anything. I'm aware of the lead actress,
Maria Bakalova,
because she was Borat's daughter. I'm aware of the other lead actress who is the romantic partner of. She's
Amanda something.
but yeah, Amandla. She's a lead in a Star Wars show right now, or a cancelled Star Wars show, The Acolyte. So I'm aware of a lot of these performers. The one who's covered in the glow sticks, I'm aware of her because she's like an up and coming fresh talent that people love for when she's behind projects like Shiver Baby and Bottoms are like really beloved movies that came out in the last few years. I haven't seen them. But I know of these people, I know of these actors, and the other projects they're in. I am aware of them, but I haven't actually sat down and experienced them. So
this could be a cast of people who are going places.
And it was just so surreal to actually sit down and watch a movie with an ensemble of people who I've never actually partaken in before, but know in a weird way. And I'm like, oh, is this what they're like? Oh, okay. The only person I'm aware of is, of course, the actor who plays Greg, who is Lee Pace. He's been in so many things over the years. It's just like, oh, it's Lee Pace. Oh, I'm glad to see my good friend Lee Pace. So
yeah, I wasn't too familiar with many of the actors or actresses in this, other than Maria Bakalova, because I've seen Borat's subsequent movie film. But
yeah, please say the whole title. Yeah, you have to say the whole
it's
title.
it's a much longer title than
Oh, no,
that.
oh, I know.
And there's a running gag in the film where it keeps changing. And yeah, but when I was looking up the cast list, like I recognized some of the names, like Dan's what was his name again?
Lee Pace.
Lee Pace and the other guy. Like I'd heard their names around. I looked up the other actresses and they were in a bunch. So it just seemed interesting to me, because usually when I think of these types of horror films, they tend to, at least for me, get people that I have never heard of, or only in a couple of projects. So it seemed really interesting to me that, like, oh, these guys are actually somewhat prolific, or even up and coming.
And you're not as, not to say you aren't aware, but you're not as finger on the pulse of young upcoming talent in
Oh, not at
comparison to
all.
myself.
Not at all, yeah.
As soon as the movie started and it is two women kissing, and I knew who both of them were without ever actually seeing them in anything, because I haven't seen the second Borat film, but I saw her. And I just said, oh, that's Borat's daughter. Bartek will sure to be informing us about this on the podcast.
You know what's funny is, about a week ago when you recommended the film, I looked up the cast list and she was in it. I'm like, oh, she's in this. That's interesting. I'll see her in something else. And then when I was watching it, I'd forgotten that.
Oh, wow. Because I saw her and I'm like, oh, it's Borat's daughter. Haven't watched Borat 2 at all. But
she's very good in it.
Of course. Everyone says she's really good. And hence she's probably in a movie like this, in which she's an upcoming talent. She for people came out of nowhere with the second Borat film, even though she had a catalogue of work beforehand. But enough about those surrounding elements. Let's talk about the meat of the matter itself, the film. What did you think?
You nailed it when you said this was an interesting one. Even though I walked in knowing that it was, meant to be a comedy, it took a very long time for me to kind of get it. For a lot of it, it just kind of felt like it was playing itself very straight. And we've talked about this many times on the podcast when we've talked about, I guess, slasher films or more modern horror films, where a lot of the cast members, a lot of the characters in the film are, and we have our different sayings for it, kill fodder, or as you say, meat. It's like, okay, these characters exist to be killed. And for a lot of it, that's what these characters were. It took me a very long time to kind of get like, oh, they're saying like really, really bizarre things. Like a lot of the time they were kind of hitting you over the head with it, but there was one scene in particular, it was the scene where the gun came out, where it was just line after line of like, oh my God, shut up. And then I finally got like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing now.
It is a film that plays itself very straight-laced, so that way it pays off. And that includes its humor, because I also agree with you. The first half of the film didn't present any real comedy of note. It didn't show its hand of the satirical nature, other than these people are rich and vapid. Okay, they're clearly going to do something with this, because you don't, even in back in the day, but you really don't now, have these people portrayed without any further examination.
Yeah, you even got like the very obvious, like, oh, there's going to be a hurricane and we're going to be stuck in this place in the middle of nowhere. It's like, okay, well, you're setting it up.
Oh, and that's clear, like, horror tropes, but I'm even talking about just the social tropes, like the social standings tropes of these characters, in which when we first introduce the other ones inside of the pool, like underneath the water in the pool,
the first 20 minutes of the film,
you immediately, at least I immediately reacted with a grimace on my face of like, oh, these fucking wankers. Like one covered on all the tattoos and the armpit hair, and you got this one and that one, and that's even before they talk. And I'm like, oh, okay,
you're seeing the dynamics established.
We're gonna have to deal with these wankers. But that's the thing, in your mind somewhere in there that there's going to be some greater form of payoff, because you can't just have the audience be genuinely sympathetic to what these people are in the first half without changing it or challenging it and or developing it. And they do that with pretty much everything. That's actually a complaint I had for the film. It's probably my biggest complaint, is it feels a little amateurish, but it's aiming to be ambitious. That's the rub of it's aiming to be so ambitious, and I appreciate what it's going for. I like it on paper if you explained what it's about and how it goes about it, but especially throughout the movie, not just in that first half, but throughout the whole movie, it was so overt about its scripting. I could just exposition, set up, exposition. Oh, people don't talk like this. I kept being like, people don't talk like this. Like, there's so many times in which a character will be like, they'll start a sentence by being like, do you know about blank? Or what about blank? And it was just, you are giving me information, the audience, but they wouldn't talk like that. Even these rich assholes who are detached from reality would not talk like that. That was my biggest hurdle throughout the movie is I'm supposed to believe, even on a purely superficial level, that these people have a history and a friendship with one another. But because the film is trying to be clever and making sure that it's informing us, the audience, of things, so that way when they twist it on its head or pay it off in the second half, we aren't cheated. But I was too keenly aware of the movie being a movie like, oh, here's the sword, and here's this, and here's that, and this character's saying, well, this person's missing, so what's that about? And, oh, I'm going to go check the generator by myself. Of course you are. And it's just too much of writing 101 stuff for me to fully appreciate what they did do, because when they did finally get cooking in the back half, or once people started dying and you realize that there is no killer, probably it's just them being idiots killing themselves or each other, once that got cooking, I was happy. I was really engaging with it, and once the comedy really started to show itself much more, I was on the side of the movie. But there were just points, not in the first half, just throughout it, where I just couldn't be in the rhythm of it, because this just feels like they're figuring it out. The writer of this and the writing team of this don't have a great amount of catalog behind them, but
by the time
first outing, really.
Yeah, but by the time you get to being on the film side, you're down to like half the cast, maybe a bit less. So it feels like, oh, you could have done a bit more with that. And they get rid of like the two guys in the group like very early on.
The two well-known actors too.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah. But what did you feel about the film? Talk to me a bit more about your journey with it.
Yeah, I felt the most warmth for it when it was over, just because I was seeing, the full picture of it. Like, I did have this sense in my mind, like, okay, this is a satirical horror comedy kind of film. There's going to be some sort of, like, meaning to the ending. It's not going to be, your typical, like, it was you, dead, and then, police come and huddle them or whatever like that. So I was thinking, like, okay, there's going to be some sort of, like, comedic payoff or, like, poignant payoff, and I think the film did deliver on it. I was expecting something a bit more bizarre. Like, there was a line, just before they started the whole, bodies, bodies, bodies game. One of them said a line along the lines of like, oh, but every time we play this, it gets so toxic and we're like fighting with each other. I thought it would be really funny if the film ended with something like, they're all alive and it's like, see, we told you we get pretty toxic.
Oh, I see.
Like a real sort of like, twist kind of thing. But no, it played it, relatively straight in that regard.
It played it to its logical extreme, where they became so toxic that they literally started to kill each other.
Yeah. And I think the thing that kept me going was the mystery aspect of it. Like, okay, where is it going to go? Like, what is, the inciting incident of all this that is causing everything to happen? And it was a very, logical answer that I was happy with.
I wasn't engaging with it on that level. The mystery, I didn't even consider it, honestly, because once Lee Pace got killed, which is like the first kill we see on the screen.
Yes.
I think it showed its hand of what it was going to be for the rest of the runtime. And so there was this looming thing of, well, what about Pete Davidson? How did he die? And I considered, oh, he may have just killed himself or something. And I didn't really care too much about that. So I wasn't engaging personally with the film on that level. I was engaging with it on like, okay, what's it saying? Like, what's its relevant social commentary about the younger generations or the elites? And it wasn't doing any of that for a good while. For a good while, it's one of my least favorite things, which is people running around in dark rooms, squealing.
When they found the first body, like the first guy that died, who we learn at the end killed himself, it was reminding me of a YouTuber that we like. I Ate Everything. He's done a couple of reviews of like YouTuber movies, which
Yeah.
are very much, comedy films done by very young people, kind of these people's ages. And I remember a recurring complaint he'd have in all of them is when the characters would just start screaming, and that was meant to be funny. And I remember when they found that body, it was just visual and audio noise because they're outside, it's heavily raining, they're all screaming, they're all panicking, they're running to the car, and it felt very overwhelming.
I was shocked, actually. I don't know if this took you by surprise. Maybe you noticed this and I'm just a dummy, but I was, and I guess you could make an argument because they're so selfish and detached, but I was genuinely surprised at the end that they had left his body outside the entire time.
That's a good, yeah.
On a purely, like, normal functioning human level, you wouldn't do, I wouldn't do that.
One of
Like,
them's the best friend in the whole world of one of the other
and they just
characters.
left him in the mud. I was just surprised by that. I was like, oh yeah, I guess we never saw them do that.
Yeah, I guess the immediate reaction was, let's run to the car, get out of here, get help. But then, yeah, at no point go back for the body.
But
They go back to the mansion and around it, but
they
yeah.
are inherently cruel people. They wouldn't do it. But it just was a bit of a surprise at the end. He was still sitting there, and I'm like, oh yeah, they did leave him there. Strange that. I guess
Yeah.
it makes sense, but it was just one of those details that made me laugh at the end of them having just left their friend and the first person killed in a puddle
Hmm.
for the whole night.
We had because before the actual murder and stuff happened, they play like a genuine round of the game. And the older guy is the victim there, and he throws out the line like, the best defense is a good offense, and the other guy hates this guy, and he's like trying to get under his skin. He keeps asking like, what does that mean? And what does that mean?
Trying to wind him up.
Trying to wind him up, and it seems like as the film went on, like that line became a bit more poignant because like the way that everyone talked to each other would be to, dig at the things that they're sensitive about and get very cruel about things.
Let's talk about the ensemble, the cast of characters, because for a majority of the film's runtime, it is very much people running around in a dark house squealing, and then we finally come to a head once the characters start locking horns on that interpersonal level that you were
Mm.
discussing. So, how about we talk about the people and what we felt about them, how we connected to them or not, who stood out, what were your opinions on these performances, the usual.
Again, I mentioned already that when the film was over, I appreciated it more than as I was watching it. And thinking back on the cast, they are kind of distinct. Like I could describe these guys much better than the Friday the 13th, kill fodder
Of
meat
course.
characters. Yeah, so we have the two guys, one of and well, we'll start with the two main characters. So we're introduced to the gay couple,
Hmm.
Maria Bakalova and the other one whose name I've forgotten.
Yeah,
She's a,
Sophie and B
yeah,
is the characters. B is Borat's daughter, and
yeah.
Sophie
Um,
is the other
and
one.
they're introduced, immediately the film opens on them kissing and saying romantic things, and
Getting down to having sex,
getting done to having
almost.
sex. Yep, and you like these characters. They're the kind of heart that you're carrying through, and then it's them entering this group of more vain characters and seeing how everyone interacts. And the one that the Sophie character has a history with them,
A
and
deep history that's unspoken, but clearly tensions are in the air.
yep, and the B character is complete outsider. It's just the new girlfriend of 6 weeks or six
Yes,
months. I can't
6
remember.
weeks.
6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Um, and how this new character enters this life of people who they don't know. And then there's two other couples in this group. There is the younger guy who is the best friend of Sophie,
Mm-hmm.
who's
Pete Davidson's character,
yep,
yeah.
who's dating a girl who she's very insecure
And a wannabe
and a
actress.
wannabe actress, and that keeps coming up. Like she's an actress, she's faking. Is kind of dynamic that she has with others. There's the older guy who's like, guy that one of the other girls met on Tinder like 2 weeks
Yeah,
ago.
she's not even sure.
She's not even sure about a lot of things about him because he's just like a new
He
guy.
he served in Afghanistan. He's a vet.
Hmm.
In the end, he was a veterinarian.
Yeah, and that girl is like the ditzy one of the group.
That's correct.
Yeah, she's kind of made fun of
She's the
a little
party
bit.
girl.
Party girl, yeah, she's the one that has all of the glow sticks around her neck. So it's like, oh,
And a
look at me.
podcast. She has a podcast.
She has a podcast, and I love the pod. That was a very funny line when it was said. And there's this one other girl, I forget her name, but
Jordan.
Jordan, yeah, she stood out a lot to me in this film. She's one of the more confident ones. In fact, later on, the Alice, I think, the one with the glow sticks around her, points out like she's my confident friend that's kind of like my role model. She's very sure of herself, and she seems to have like a little bit of tension with the main couple in different ways.
Pretty much everyone, because she's the outsider
Yeah.
in their group. She is the only one really not in a couple in this
she doesn't
situation.
have a significant
other. She is black, which does come up for the two black characters in the movie. Like the racial dynamic in this group is fucked up, as the ditzy one tries to blab her way out of. And she's apparently a rags to riches story, Jordan.
Yeah.
Or at least she tries to boost that up as her narrative for why she is actually the sensible one in comparison to all of these vacuous rich people.
Yeah, so it's three couples and that character, and they're not really present in the film, but there's like this eighth character that they keep mentioning called like Max.
And where is he? And then he shows up at the end,
very much
unaware of what's gone on.
That reminds me of when we did Oscar, because that's how Oscar ends.
Yes, with the titular Oscar.
I'm Oscar.
Now, I have not seen the second Borat film as mentioned, so I've not seen the great comedic talents of the actress, and I was gravely disappointed with her in this and her role, because she, for all of the goodwill that I have towards this film, for subversions and satire and taking the tropes of the genre and playing with them, she gets none of that. She is audience surrogate character. She's the likable one. She's meek. She's a do-gooder person. She's the one that has the most level head. She's boring. Inherently, she's boring as a character to watch. She's only good in the way that I can imprint upon her because I am not a part of this group myself. But as an actual character and as a performance, it's thankless. It's a truly thankless position. I never got anything out of her, and I was keeping in the back of my mind, oh, am I being unfair because I am aware that this actress is heralded in recent times as a very funny person, and maybe that's not fair because she isn't supposed to be the funny one in this movie. But even then, 99% of the time, this character, especially in a horror film, I do not connect with. I do not care about. There's nothing to her. They hint at little parts of her backstory, little things that she reveals, and those are boilerplate to me. Oh, she has a mother who's borderline. And I like how Jordan reacts to that. Like, oh, who fucking cares? And I'm like, great point, Jordan. Actually, I'm on your side on this because I don't care. I didn't care at all. I have no connection to this character other than I'm supposed to be able to put myself in her shoes. But even then, there are so many points in which I'm like, well, if I'm doing that, I wouldn't be reacting the way she is. And that's the thing where it's like, but it's a give and take.
Yeah.
It's a give and take because I think the film wants you to look at her the most as the one where it's like you, the audience, would probably be her in this situation.
No, I agree with that. But for myself, who was, as I said before, more interested in the mystery aspect of things, there comes a point where the film starts like questioning, her accountability or like the potential that she might be the guilty one in the group who's instigated everything. And even though I was on her side, they did bring up a couple of things like, oh, you went back to the car, you are the unknown one here. How much do we really know you? And even as an audience member, like we only met this character at the beginning of this film, like, 20-ish minutes before they entered the house and met all these people. So I thought it might have been like a meta thing of like, oh yeah, maybe the main character is the villain or something like that. You know, the potential was there.
That's the thing. I still, I must admit, this is the divide between you and I.
No,
I
yeah,
never engaged on the movie on that level because I thought, oh well, that's too obvious. They're not going to do that. Instead, what they do is much, in my opinion, the more obvious going about it, which is you are an outsider, so we're all going to turn against you at some
yeah,
point
for sure, for sure.
to emphasize how we're
But the
elitists.
film has already brought up the idea of like, oh, you know, you're doing the obvious. Like that's what the
Mm-hmm.
first guy said during the first game, where it's like, you know, it would be really obvious if I was the one that killed this guy that I very clearly hate.
Oh, and of course, of course. No, I agree.
Yeah.
And I'm not. That's the thing, though. You and I can have this conversation, and it boils down to functionality in the script. The character serves the purpose,
Hmm.
but I didn't care
No, I agree.
about
I
them
agree
at
with you
all.
about
Like,
I agree with you about the thankless role. Like, I liked her on like the surface level of like, you know, she's built up to be likable enough.
yeah, the yeah. I just, yeah. I guess I just. It's hard to say because the film is filled with repellent characters by design.
Yeah.
So she stands out as the most likable because she's the least repellent. But then that's also the tough part because it's like, well, are you actually that great of a character, not like person, but character?
Yeah.
And I just was left lacking. And so I hope one day to see this performer in something where she gets to shine more because you know, she's an upcoming, and I'm really excited to see her be funny. But she didn't get to be funny in this one, and that's
For sure,
okay.
yeah.
That's okay. Other people get to be funny in this. What did you think about her partner, Sophie? Though, what did you think about this love at the center of this movie that's toxic and fucked up, and clearly there's stuff being withheld from both sides? What did you think of Sophie? Because the group all have an opinion on this person that we are only getting to see through a certain lens.
Yeah, well, similar to B, the film opens on her, so I was inherently on her side for a lot of it, and she, um, you know, despite us learning a lot of the things from her past that are very dark, she does seem very like likable and level-headed in a lot of ways. Even when it brought up the possibility that like she'd been cheating, like I was even kind of on her side, like, well, you know, that was then, how are you feeling now, kind of thing. Um, so in a way, like when we get to the climax and like the two leads are the couple are fighting each other in the mud, turning on each other, like I was sad about that because I really did like, you know, that character.
Sophie was probably the one that I connected with the most because she is multifaceted. She's flawed, she's manipulative, but she is caring, but she's absent. She probably is cheating on the main character.
I think so too. Yeah.
And that's something, and she's willing to go to extreme lengths to hide the negative parts of herself. As the other characters say, when stuff gets tough, she runs away, and we see that in the film. I think the performance is really good, and she's capable of doing some fucked up shit, but has remorse about it on some level, but not too much where I go, well, you're actually a goody two. They
She's
they
not an angel, yeah.
and her backstory is interesting, and I did like how she did bring forth the fact that she is a black person and with a drug problem, and then that's, oh, it's a problem when it's me,
Hmm.
but not when it's the white people and the white guy. Oh no, it's fine then. I liked how that was actually something that was discussed in the film and argued about because I was getting a little bit antsy with how long the film was taking its time to actually dig into these kind of more challenging topics that would inherently be within this social group.
Hmm.
And with films like this, they often springboard the horror to these things. While this film, it's pretty like divided in the middle. Like the first half is pretty much a traditional horror where you're running around in a house going, "Oh my god!" And then the second half is where they really start chewing into all of that stuff. I hope the whole film would kind of do much more of, and so Sophie served as a character really well for that, and I liked her. I thought she was good. Like, she's a piece of shit, but she's the one that I would like. I was happy to follow as a character.
Mm-hmm.
I thought she was very good. Who else in the group do you want to discuss from here and what they offered?
I guess the Alice character, the one who's dating the older guy with the glow sticks around her neck, she was the one who, for a lot of it, like I think she's probably the most comedic character in the film.
Mm-hmm.
And for a long time, because I just wasn't quite gelling with it, it was kind of grating on me a little bit. And like I said before, when we get to that gun scene and she's just having like line after line after line of like, this is dumb things she's saying, that was really when I started to grow into the film and realize like, okay, this is actually very on purpose what they're doing with this character.
I had that when she was saying how little she knew of Greg, and
Mm.
he's a Libra or whatever it was. That's important. That says so much. Middle names. You don't learn about that for ages. I'm like, oh my God.
No, she's not wrong, I guess.
And I thought that was a great tipping off point of like what she was like. I found her comedy enjoyable because I guess I have a soft spot at times for the characters who are overtly supposed to be grating and shrill and
Mm.
annoying and attention seeking. If the film is being aware, then I can be on its side a bit more than ones that are like, oh, you're supposed to be you're supposed to find her lovable. The film never thought you were supposed to find this character lovable. It was pitiable.
She's one of the reasons why I'd be keen to check out the film again
Yeah.
with non-fresh eyes, yeah.
And she's the one that probably out of all of them puts on the veneer. And here's a discussion. Do you think it's her putting it on or genuinely puts on this face of being the friendly one in the group? She's the most open arms to Sophie being back and to B being here at all. But then in her last moments, she unloads how she apparently, and again, in quotations, feels about Jordan and about this person, this person. How do you read this character, Alice? Like, was she a person who was a genuinely friendly, happy-go-lucky, or was she that more venomous side she was kind of spewing out, or was that her kind of just putting on a front in her own way? How did you read this character?
Even though we already have another character who they were playing around with the idea that they're the insecure one, I saw the Alice character as being very insecure. Like, she was the one that, she has the podcast about, the friend that I really admire. Whenever they got into arguments, like if she was the one being attacked, like obviously she'd be on the defense and a little bit, blubbery, oh, middle names take a while to learn. He's a Libra. It's like, I've been for a long time, 2 weeks.
She's very defensive.
Very defensive. But then when the arguments are happening around her to and from, she was the one that was like, trying to take both sides at different times. It's like, yeah, that's right. I'm like, oh no, but they said this, they said that kind of thing. She seemed like she really wanted to be on everyone's side, but there's this stressful situation that's, just messing her up inside.
She's played perfectly from the performer and in the writing too, because when it's at the height of the goofy comedy of it all, her character really lives in that space, but can come back down to earth to have the more serious, pointed moments without it feeling disingenuous. Such as you can have her be the one that is Miss, did you just shoot me? Did you just shoot me? I can't believe you just shot me.
It
but
really
also
hurts.
Be the one, it really hurts. She could also be the one, though, that does reaffirm that Jordan did suffer a lot and had to go to counseling for PTSD, and she's saying that in a very
she did, yes,
concise and
that was a really good line,
and it's really well performed, and her character was really good as one that can be the comedic relief, but doesn't purely exist to be comedic relief when the time called for it. They really portioned it well with her when it came to having the best of both worlds. You can have your cake and eat it too with this character. And I was actually kind of bummed when she died because I was like, oh, the one that offered up the most laughs is gone from the movie now. I did laugh a lot at her. I found her very funny and enjoyable.
In the pool scene, was she the one that brought the champagne over? Or was that one of the other characters?
Oh, I cannot recall now. Okay. Probably. I cannot recall who brought the
It was either
champagne
her or
over.
the actress. I can't remember which one.
You want to talk about the actress, Emma?
I guess we can. She's one of the
I guess we can.
she's one of the earlier one that dies, and I think
She's like the third or fourth that dies in this movie.
yes, because Alice has the line about how like the three main people from the first game were the first ones that died, and she was
Suspect.
she was the only girl that everyone like really suspected during that time, but obviously it went to the guy. Yeah, she how does she die again?
She fell down the stairs.
She fell down the stairs, yeah.
They assumed she got pushed, but we never know.
Yeah.
We never know. We never find out. She probably fell down the stairs for some reason, but we don't know.
And you know what? She died so early. I actually don't.
She died like midway through the movie. They just move on from it really quickly.
Yeah, but she's like the third one of the group.
I don't know what to do with this character because there's so much loaded material there that I don't feel they pulled the trigger on. There's this really great back and forth that they have in which I think it's Sophie calls her a coward for staying in this relationship too long. And I loved all of that, and I was hoping that there was going to be more repercussions of that, especially because it's her boyfriend that dies first. And I was really wanting them to take up the chance to have something to say about it, but instead she runs away and is sleeping in a bed for a good portion of it, and then gets up and then has a little spat and then falls down some stairs later. And they tease like, oh, she has these tells for when she's lying, or when she's nervous. And I was waiting for that to be a factor into the story, but instead it was just kind of like a joke of like, oh, whenever they're in doubt of how she is, just say, well, she's an actress, you know what they're like.
Yeah, it was only a factor in the no stakes game that they played. In the actual stakes one, yeah, it really only went to that actress line. Like, oh, she's got acting experience, she wants to be an actress, she can fake.
It's a bit of a sadness because for a film that is so much about setting up the board and all of the pieces and letting the game play, they spend so much time setting up the board with her character and like all of these little details, only in the end to be like, they were ways to just tell, honestly, very tired jokes. Just, she's an actress, you know what they like, and she's not even a good one. Honk honk. She's as deep as what Pete Davidson's character was, but he has the benefit of not being in the movie very long. So it's not as if at the end of this you're really annoyed that they spent so much of the time on a really lame character with him, because he's only in the movie for probably like 5 minutes and then he's dead.
A bit longer than that, but
you know
like,
what I'm saying.
But but before the film turns into the horror film, like he's one of the most prominent characters, so you have your time with him.
Yeah, and he's still very much played as like a two-dimensional dude bro who's a bit of a cocky guy, dickhead. Yeah, Sophie, I mean, Emma's just a waste of space in the end. It's like we had to have something in the movie to take up time.
Like I was even saying when we were talking about Alice, like even though Emma's the insecure one, like we have much more time with Alice, so I think of her as being the more insecure one.
What did you think about Greg? We haven't talked about the guys really.
Yeah, Greg, I quite liked Greg. Again, he's another one that we didn't get too much of during the horror section. He's only got like the one scene. But it felt like a very inspired choice to have, like, you know, the character who's like twice as old as everyone else, someone that they met on Tinder. Like, I haven't had that experience myself, but I think I've heard you tell stories of like, oh yeah, one person just brought like their Tinder date to this party and it was kind of weird. But also they were kind of interesting kind of thing. And it was interesting seeing that character here, like taking up the space, being very socially dominant in certain situations, but also seeming like he had more life experience and there were things being unsaid about him. Like I remember there was one scene where I think it was when B was first on her own walking around the house, he's like meditating somewhere. When later on when they discover like all the stuff in his bag, it's like, oh, this is crazy. He's got like survival knives and maps. And when they question him about it, like his immediate reaction is like, there's a hurricane.
It was very obvious.
Very to the point, and like, yeah, there's a reason for it.
He was he was such a fascinating character because one, I'm aware of this actor very much so. I've seen him in a whole slew of material, and so he's usually not always, but I've seen him often play nice people. He's played villains. So he was a villain in Guardians of the Galaxy, for instance. He was the villain. But usually I'm aware of him being nicer figures, and he was doing that. I was like, okay, but there's something menacing about him. He's ripped. He's like shredded. He's older, which is weird to have in this dynamic. He has anger issues that he's clearly trying to control.
Mm.
Like you see him want to really fucking lay into Pete Davidson, but then he says, "I'm going to go to bed," and there's just all of this brewing conflict with this character who in the end just gets beat to death senselessly. He didn't do anything wrong. They, in a way, ambushed him to then kill him.
Yeah, we as the audience,
when you think about it in the long run.
Yeah, we as the audience are seeing him from an outsider's perspective of like, oh, well, when they approached him, like, he was completely vulnerable. He's responding to them very, calmly. He's recognizing that something is wrong and he's being a bit wary about it. When he knocks one of them over when they try to attack him, like, he's immediately apologetic and they take that opportunity to, like, down him.
I was a bit confused. What was the room he was in when they killed him? Was that the gym?
That's a very good question, Ryan.
And why did it have power inside of it? Because there was lights.
Those red light. I thought that's what they were reacting to when they looked in the window. It's like, whoa, what's going on in there?
And there was a blue light along the edge of the floor, like along each wall. There was like a blue light, and he had his thing plugged in, or at least he had a thing on.
He had some sort of like weird
face
mask
thing.
Mask. Yeah, I thought it was like, is that like a tanning bed
Sure.
for your face or
I thought
something?
it was like a massaging. I don't care, but it's for rejuvenation and meditation. And he had his headphones in, which were wireless, which means the Bluetooth was great on his phone. What was that about?
That's a good... Yeah, I thought it was like, is this like the garage or something?
The basement?
It's like a very wide, empty room.
It was a gym in a way because she beat him with like a... I can't remember, like a weight, a dumbbell weight thing.
Yeah.
But why was there power down there?
Maybe,
and if so, why didn't they just stay down there? You know what I mean? It's one of those things where that happened. Maybe I'm a dummy and there's a reason, but I was like, oh, okay. Lee Pace is murdered. I felt bad because he was the one I related to the most because he was a chill guy. And I was like, man, I'm a chill guy. But there's so many other things about him. Pete Davidson is in the film. He's someone apparently that matters in real life. I don't care. He was annoying in this, as his character needed to be. When the reveal was, again, spoiler, that he killed himself with the sword, I laughed, and I went, yeah, that sounds about right. What didn't make sense to me was his phone must be the strongest motherfucker in the universe. Because it was stuck in the worst storm of all time, out in the open the entire night. And you can't just say, oh, it was buried under the mud, because did you see how fucking strong that rain was when anyone went out there? Insane that phone was still working. Absolutely insane. I can't believe that phone was still working. Any thoughts on that?
You know, Ryan, when you bring up all these things about the guys, I'm starting to realize that I wasn't thinking that strongly about them. But yeah, you're right. That is weird. It's very convenient.
And then we have Jordan. She's the last one we haven't talked about that much. We've already kind of hinted at, but she's the one that is the when the shit hits the fan, they decide I'm in charge.
She reminded me a lot of the police guy in Cube, where like in this kind of dynamic, there'll be the one character who's like, much stronger and sure of themselves and will like kind of take over the group and, say the things that need to be said. And much like Cube, she took a sort of mental turn at one point.
But I think it's a bit harder to make those direct kind of lines of comparison, because I was going to compare her to like Christian Slater in Very Bad Things.
It's a very different role, but
she fills the vacuum of the one who is going to take charge, but they themselves are the one that's corrupted and flawed. And that is true. She's very headstrong, and she's an asshole from the very beginning of the movie. She's like the one who's most overtly a bitch, you could say. And there's a lot of personal grudge happening behind every one of her actions.
Yeah.
And that did make it very tantalizing to see how things would get worse, because it wasn't as if she would make things worse like the guy in Cube because she's crazy. She's going to make things worse because she has this like unresolved bitterness towards Sophie and thus towards B, and that these two used to have a relationship of some sort, and even before this happened, they had some relationship, and then Sophie disappeared.
Yeah, there's the hint that, like, her panties or something are in the car.
Mm-hmm. And yet there's all this discussion of like, I didn't even know you were coming. And it's like, how much did and didn't you know, Jordan, before everything? And I liked her very much. I'm a little talking about the humor. One humor moment that I'm just a little iffy on of how I feel overall is her last lines,
Hmm.
being like her shooting a gun and being like, check
Check
the
her
texts.
yeah.
And I get it. It was funny. I laughed, but I was like, I don't know. Like, I think you already hit that beat. And I'm like, this character, although was funny in the movie, I feel like that moment was such an overtly goofy comedic thing that I felt like after everything we just had with this
It
character,
felt very scripted.
yeah, it felt like, wouldn't that be a fun thing to put in there?
Well, yeah, and it's also just repeating a thing that she was saying before. Like, oh, so that's really the last thing she's gonna say?
It's still on her mind that Sophie
Yeah.
is a betrayer,
I
which is the generous read.
Yeah, I agree with you on she was one of the ones I was more interested in. Like, before it turned into a horror film, she was the one that I was very interested in because she has that line with B where it's like, you know, they're very close and it's like, oh, is she gonna kiss her or something? And she's like, be careful, okay? And she had her tension with Sophie, and then seeing her take charge of the group, you know, try to control everything and then making that turn and seeing how strongly, you know, she's attacking B and she's the one that throws her out of the house. The whole tension with the gun and seeing her break down as the conversation went on. Like, I thought that was a really good arc to follow the whole way through.
What was the film getting at in your point of view? What's the deeper substance here? So we've kind of talked about each one of these characters and the minorly how they interplay, but once everything starts to click into place, is this film saying anything deeper? What is it actually trying to grapple with for you?
Uh, from my reading while watching the film, I think it was focusing on, you know, the whole aspect of uh how to phrase it. I guess like the two-faced nature of friendship. When everyone has their own agendas. In reading the trivia, there was a lot of talk about and this is very poignant when you consider the last line of the film, like how connected everyone wants to be through like social media. You know, there's characters doing TikToks throughout the film. The inciting incident is a TikTok gone wrong. Um, they lose reception when you know, the hurricane starts and that you get to that audio and visual noise scene that I got. The thing that was making them panic was like, we can't call the police, our friend is dead, we're trapped here, what do we do, how do we get help? And you know, the car I think was broken down or something, it couldn't move.
Mm-hmm.
So it was looking
It was
at,
drained of battery because it was left on the lights.
yeah, so it's the from reading the trivia, it seems that it's about, you know, how reliant we that the younger generation is on technology.
And how did you feel about how the film communicated that and what it actually meant to you? Because in a weird way, it sounds so corny when you say it out loud. And like the film
Yeah.
is about how, well, if the young people don't have their phones, they sure do go crazy. I know that's not what you're saying, but you know what
I
I
know,
mean.
and I actually agree with you. When I was reading the trivia, I'm like, I don't know that I was getting that. Like, it's there, it is there, especially with that scene I just mentioned in the last line of the film. But I just saw it more as the thing that I said about, you know, unresolved tension. That's a phrase you used before. It's about unresolved tension in a group and how that manifests into more problems during a stressful situation.
I will admit I didn't read too much of the trivia because what I was reading, I was not disagreeing with, but it was lessering my opinions. And that happens. You have to sometimes
Yeah.
say, I reject whatever the author is putting down, or at least how it's being explained. Because
I was half and half on it. Really, it was like, oh, that's interesting that you were thinking this, and there are elements of that in the film, but I don't think it was that prevailing.
Because what you just laid out, I feel, was very shallow in the movie. That's what the thrust of the movie is getting out of, like, the younger generation and how they connect and how they, all of that. And technology, don't give a shit about that. What I really liked about this is you strip away those attempts at getting to having an actual conversation about hierarchy and about elitism and class, even about race. It's there. Those things are there and they are good, but I think they all served the master of the story, which is the human condition, paranoia. I was thinking oftentimes during this of The Thing, for instance, in which you have these assortment of characters who know each other stuck in a confined location. And yes, there's a sci fi monster that's turning into them. Who can you trust? But that's just a way of getting to the heart of the matter, which is how quickly we will go into self preservation mode and turn on one another when given the opportunity. And that's very much how I felt about Bodies, Bodies, Bodies. And it was using the I guess the outline of what if we did this style of story but with a bunch of zoomers or whatever, and wouldn't that be an interesting thing to do? Which it is. It is an interesting thing to do. Like, how does a story like this that you often maybe see happen to full-grown adults, such as in Coherence, for instance, a film we have already referenced, where Coherence is a movie that's like, it's a bunch of rich friends who have known each other for decades on end coming together, and things start to fall apart because they've had a lifetime's worth of regrets and interpersonal conflicts. Well, these are people who are just starting their life. I was thinking about Mean Creek as well with this, and how that was a bunch of friends who were disingenuous friends, and when the chips were down, they turned against each other, but it ate away at their souls. Now, this doesn't have that aspect to it in the same way. And there's also something about the toxic relationships. Toxic relationships, whether it be ones that are platonic or ones that are romantic, because at the end of this all, these two women that are left are completely broken as people, as a couple as well. They were fighting in the mud to see if Sophie was cheating on her when, let's be honest, B already knows it in her heart. So why does she need to confirm it through this text?
She knows it, and why is the other one trying to hide it when they both seem to know it?
And that, again, is a better way of getting at the idea that they do not communicate effectively. And so when the film ends with our lead being in awe of the fact that she has reception and everything turns back on, I think that serves better to the piece of the breakdown of a relationship and toxic relationships and the human condition than some of the other stuff that the trivia and they're talking about, where, and again, when you read something on IMDb, it's like a one sentence thing, so take it with a grain of salt, and because sometimes nuance is lost.
And it has been like almost 18 hours since I read it, so I might get some details wrong.
Do you recommend the movie? Would you recommend this overall?
I would recommend this film. I really do. I really have appreciated it more once it finished and once I've started talking about it. We've had that multiple times on the podcast. There's a lot more going on in this one that I give it credit for, but yeah, that first half was a bit slow, but I'd be really keen to see how it goes again on a second time through, maybe even, with you or a group.
I think this would be a great group experience film. I just watched it with my wife, and she seemed to really enjoy it a lot more than I did. I found it a bit testing with just the modernity of the genre that it's going in. I am not a huge horror head, and I'm less of a fan of quiet bang horror, which this does have. You're just watching characters with their torches in the dark, screaming at each other, and there's too much of that for my taste. I would rather the film have been much more of what it had going on later. And I do feel like some of that stuff later was struggling because it was so compact. Everything about Jordan, for instance, is all hashed out in a very labored but engaging, nonetheless, scene where she's saying, "Here's my problem with Sophie," and then Alice is giving her opinion, and then they wrestle for a gun, and one of them dies. And I really think that we could have had some of that, for instance, as well as other characters like Emma and so on, have more time to breathe in the movie rather than servicing the master that is young people want to see a spooky movie. I often think about with this genre with horror what people want out of it. What scares you? What elicits these kind of creeping feelings of dread or existential woes? My brother-in-law, for instance, was disappointed in a recent horror movie because he went into it wanting to be scared and then it didn't scare him because it wasn't that type of scary movie.
Mm.
And I just don't do horror films in that way. I try not to do most films in that way, but I won't lie. I go into some sci-fi movies and I'm like, I want this of it, and then if it doesn't, I do get a little disappointed. So, as a fan of a certain genre in particular, I know how that is. But with bodies, I wanted it to be funnier and I wanted it to be more character focused, and it does do those things. And when it does, I really did enjoy myself. So I am going to recommend it, but I am going to say I'm looking forward to seeing what this creative team does next, because this
Mm.
very much feels like a first draft, or when you go back to like some really great filmmakers and you go, "Oh, I can see what they're doing with the early work and how they're going to refine it
Yeah.
later on." For some reason, this is a weird one to compare to, but I'm going to anyway. David Cronenberg with Shivers. It's very much a rough around the edges, ambitious approach to things that you will see him perfect and be the master of later in his career, but that doesn't mean that Shivers isn't an interesting movie to watch.
Hmm.
But it is in a way, as you have seen it, and you've now seen what later years Cronenberg is like, very different. But you can tell, like, oh well, this is a rough draft of like what will be whatever. And I hope that's the case with this creative team, because
Yeah. It's always fun when you see
it's
something like
there.
that.
It's there.
Yeah. You even said it earlier, this is a good first step. I guess the example I'd go to for stuff that we've done on the podcast is I remember when we did we've done Prisoner of Azkaban and Amanda's other recommendation, Children of Men, which are both directed by the same person. And Children of Men iconically has like a very famous, one shot scene that takes forever. And someone pointed out that in Prisoner of Azkaban, there is a similar-ish scene like that on a much smaller scale. And it's interesting looking like, oh, maybe that was kind of like a first step to making the Children of Men scene.
Oh, interesting. Because was that before Children of Men?
I believe so, yeah.
Interesting. But bodies. Thank you, Amanda, for this recommendation. I can definitely see why this would be a favorite of that year as well, because if you're into this scene in particular, this is a great one of those. Like I mentioned, there were many movies that I would associate this with, and I'm in the minority here, but I did not like Ready or Not. That was a film I really did not enjoy, but I wanted to. And so for me to say like this is much better, like this is a really like this is something worth checking out, with it, like put that in the back of your mind of like I'm a person that doesn't think Ready or Not is very good and everyone loves that movie. This does have worth. I want to ask you this though. One of our fellow podcasting friends gave this a low review. Julio from the Contrarians
I know
gave
him.
this a low rating because of this statement, and I want to know your thoughts on this.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, the idea of I would rather a comedy film shot like a comedy film rather than a comedy film shot like a horror film. because this is shot like a horror movie. This is shot like shaky
Mm-hmm.
and spooky. When maybe this would have been better presented with a bit more of a straight-laced comedic
Maybe a
presentation, visually
little bit
speaking.
campier or something.
I don't agree. Some of my favorite comedic horror films are shot as if they are what they are, of like an actual horror. And I think, honestly, if you had to say shoot this like a traditional comedy film, I'm thinking flat, static, cut, reverse shot, like Judd Apatow bullshit. That's what I leap to if I
Hmm.
saw. If you said remake this but in a traditional comedy styling, that's what I would think of with this. But what do you feel?
I don't know that you'd have to change how you shoot it. I just think maybe the comedic sensibility just didn't appeal. Like even for me, I've admitted in this episode that it took me a very long time to even gel with any of the comedy in this film. So it just seems like it just didn't really work out. I don't know that the actual shooting of it would have changed much.
Yeah, sometimes it can, sometimes it really can, but sometimes
Maybe.
maybe not. I don't know. Now it is your time to
Mm-hmm.
shine and tell us the movie of choice
Yep.
for your recommendation.
Yep. So, after we finished off last week, we just got to chatting about a bunch of stuff, and I brought up one film that I've brought up a couple of times over the years, and I said maybe I'll pick that next time, and I decided, yeah, why not? Let's finally do it. We were talking a bit about documentaries,
Hmm.
and I always bring up, and I think I brought it up on the podcast before, one that I watched, which I thought wasn't the best documentary, but it had some funny things about it. It is the 2007 documentary film Heckler.
Boy. Oh boy. Oh boy. We're going to talk about Heckler, the documentary, which you can find available through various means. I know you originally watched it on YouTube in 7
Yeah, it's
parts.
like split into 7 parts.
I will try and find a better version,
Yeah, I will
but
too.
this is a film you have often talked about on this podcast. So
Yeah, it's a documentary about, hecklers and stand-up comedy.
that's what it's
Maybe.
about. Should be. Title and indicates that, doesn't it? Well, we'll talk about that next time. Thank you all so much for listening. If you want to recommend movies to us, or you want to follow us and keep up to date, you can hit up our social medias of Facebook and Twitter, or you can contact us over at our email address, which is Bartek.
Our email is spitandpolished@gmail.com.
Everything is included in the description of this episode. And make sure to share our podcast around and rate and review the show. If you enjoyed it, give us a review. We'd love to read it and say, oh my lord, we got one. We got a 5-star one, and they said, I like the one whose name sounds like what it is.
Yes, finally, a non-3-star review that says that.
Thank you, Bartek, for coming in today. But now we must wrap this up because we're going to play Bodies, Bodies, Bodies.
Ooh.
We're going to play out that game ourselves.
We're not going to play any of the university drama games like Death in a Minute or Wink Murder or something.
Now, having not played Bodies, Bodies, Bodies in real life, we maybe have drama equivalents when we went to university or school. Did the rules that they explained make it sound like an interesting game? And when they actually showed it, how did you feel about it? Because I had a disconnect from once they actually showed the game. After they explained it, I had a disconnect.
Yeah, it was weird because it was like, oh, okay, a body has been found, you announce it, and then the lights go off, and then you have like a werewolf-like game where you have to have a discussion, but they like immediately went to like, oh, I just think this person did it, and it was just based on their personalities. It didn't really seem like there were many rules going at it. And maybe I missed the explanation, but what was up with the slapping?
Oh, I think that was like for when they were having. I think that was a drinking game for when they had shots, and then you slap the other person, they have a shot, and then they slap. I think that's more of a drinking thing rather than purely for this game. Like I think it's connected, but I think it's like they're getting drunker while they're doing it.
It just seemed weird because
that didn't stand out to me. What stood out to me was, all right, we're going to turn off all the lights. Every single light is off. And then we're going to play this in the dark to our main character having her phone light on. And I was like, are you allowed to do that? Are you allowed to do that? I was constantly being like, are you allowed to do that? But then one of them's covered in glow sticks. I'm like, oh, Okay, yeah, I guess you must be, but then I'm like, but that character's an idiot. I was a bit confused on like the actual game itself, and then it was quite an empty moment for me when there was the turn out your pockets, and then oh, you were the killer all along, because and it's like in the game I was because of the crossed paper. With Jordan, where it's like empty out your pockets, and it's like, oh,
I remember that moment, but I don't know what was significant about, like, oh, it was
because
you.
the theory was it's the killer in the game is the killer in real life. That was their theory, and
Yeah,
it's like, so you are that.
I understand that, but what came out of her pockets that indicated that she was
the paper with the cross on it that they played in the game.
Oh, well, that was an indicator of who the killer was?
Yeah. That was the whole way the game was determined of who the killer was.
They could have found out much earlier who the killer was.
But
then.
No, the problem was they were asking that and no one was admitting it.
Yeah, I guess.
And so why was but here's the thing, in retrospect, why was Jordan hiding that?
Exactly.
Other than for a pithy moment where it's like,
see, I completely forgot.
You are the killer, and then she's like, in the game.
I completely forgot that there was like an actual physical indicator. So
I honestly wish that we got to see the game played a little bit longer, and I got more of a feel of
we could have had like an interesting thing of like, oh, remember they did a similar thing like this in the actual game, and now it's happening in real. But
I guess they tried to do that, but it just didn't pan out. Well, we'll play our version, and it will be even better.
Ryan's the killer. Fuck you, Ryan. You're the killer.
No.
Smash!
Oh my god, he's punching walls.